Have you ever faced a challenge that seemed impossible to overcome, like standing in front of a giant mountain that blocks your way, leaving you wondering how you'll ever get past it? This is the story of a teenager named David who faced his own mountain and discovered that no problem is too big when you trust in God. David was a teenager who loved to explore. He would run through fields, climb trees, and skip stones across the river. But there was one thing that scared him, a huge mountain that stood at the edge of his village. It was tall, dark, and covered in thick forests, and no one in the village ever dared to climb it. They called it the Mountain of Fear. One day, David's father told him that their family needed to travel to the other side of the mountain for an important event. David's heart sank. The only way to get there was to climb that enormous mountain. "Father," David said, his voice shaky, "do we really have to go over the mountain? It's too big. I don't think I can make it." His father smiled and placed a hand on David's shoulder. "David, I know the mountain looks big, but remember what the Bible says in Matthew 17:20. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." David wasn't sure how faith could help him climb a mountain, but he trusted his father. So the next morning they set out on their journey. As they reached the base of the mountain, David looked up. The peak seemed to touch the sky and his legs felt weak. "How will I ever climb this?" David thought to himself. But his father noticed his fear and whispered, "Remember, take it one step at a time. You don't need to climb the whole mountain all at once." As they climbed higher, David started noticing something strange. The mountain wasn't as impossible as he had imagined. Sure, it was tall and the path was tough, but every step he took made the mountain feel smaller. He began to see small flowers growing in the cracks of the rocks, and birds flying over his head, singing songs that made him smile. David turned to his father, surprised. "Father, it's still hard, but it's not as scary as I thought. I can see the beauty in the mountain now." His father smiled. "That's because you're no longer looking at how big the mountain is. You're focusing on the small steps." Psalm 121 verses 1-2 says, "I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." God is helping you with every step. As they continued climbing, David's fear started to melt away. He still had a long way to go, but now, instead of being afraid, he was focused on the journey. He saw a rabbit dart across the path and laughed. He heard the rustling of the wind through the trees and felt peace in his heart. They reached a particularly steep part of the mountain, and David's legs burned from the effort. He wanted to stop, but his father encouraged him. "You're stronger than you think, David. God is with you." Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." You're not walking alone. David took a deep breath and kept moving. Step by step they climbed higher and higher until, at last, they reached the top. David couldn't believe his eyes. The view from the peak was breathtaking. The entire valley spread out below, with rivers glistening in the sunlight and trees swaying in the breeze. The mountain, which had once seemed so big, now felt small beneath his feet. David laughed out loud. "Father, I can't believe it. The mountain doesn't seem big at all from up here." His father knelt beside him and said, "That's because you trusted God to help you with each step. Every mountain in life seems big when you're standing at the bottom, but with God's help, no challenge is too big to overcome." As they descended the mountain, David felt a new sense of confidence. He realized that the hardest part wasn't the mountain itself, it was believing that he could climb it. Once he started trusting God and taking small steps, the journey became possible, and even enjoyable. The next time David faced a challenge, whether it was a difficult test at school or a problem with a friend, he remembered the mountain. He remembered that no matter how big a problem seemed, with faith, he could take it one step at a time, and trust God to help him through. Because in the end, the mountain didn't seem so big after all. Sometimes in life, the problems we face look like giant mountains that we'll never be able to overcome. But when we trust God and take one step at a time, we find that the mountain isn't so big after all. So whatever mountain you're facing today, remember Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. With God's help, you can climb any mountain and reach the top. This story teaches that no challenge is too great when we trust in God and take small steps of faith. It's a motivational reminder that we can overcome any obstacle, no matter how big it seems at first.